Hi, everybody. This is okay. Oh, I can hear myself. All right. So, 1,486 days since Richard was premeditatedly murdered on Fort Bliss. Um, yeah, we do not have his remains. Thank you so much for coming on. Make sure I can see everybody. See, it doesn't seem to be connecting. There it is. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. So, Um, like you just heard me say, uh, and I've had to say it over and over again to understand what has happened in our son's case. From the very beginning, I was hoping never to have to say that he had been murdered, and then that it was a code red. And I didn't say it was a code red. Leilani Hart said it was a code red. And there is so much evidence against Leilani Hart in this case. She's a prime suspect in the murder case, right? This is a capital murder case and she's a prime suspect. Um, and there's so much evidence against her. And of course, Dallas Hart and Tavita Nusa. And so Tavita Nusa, CID agent, right? A Fort Bliss CID agent. Those are the prime suspects in this case. And I would even add like Jay Paulin and then, of course, Jonathan Ambrose because he's 143, right? ADA, and with Danae Katzen, of course, a suspect also in this capital murder case, which the brutality of it, you're facing the death penalty, you're facing in the state of Texas the lethal injection. And at the beginning, we were saying just come forward and, um, you know, we want to know what happened to our son. We want it all out there, and we would absolutely, um, I wouldn't call it forgiving, but we would have a different attitude then than we do now. That's all water under the bridge. Right now, they're facing the death penalty. They're facing um, the lethal injection, and I think this last week, Texas put another inmate to death. So it's a very serious case, and this is not a national capital murder case. This is an international capital murder case. Okay, it involves Juarez, Mexico, and of course, it does. There was 15 plus agencies, and part of those agencies came from Juarez, Mexico. They were absolutely working together. The FBI was in Juarez, Mexico, and found Richard's remains there. And that's been corroborated over and over again. And, we've had other people look at it. Other people look at all the evidence and tell us from their professional position what they think about it. And thank God we have just amazing friends over the years. Rob is a 30-year veteran, lieutenant colonel, in the medical field, in the warrior field. He's been deployed so many times and um, just has some real professionals that can give him opinions on the evidence that we have so that we check ourselves, right? We don't want to say things and uh, put in complaints with different agencies and institutions that is going in the wrong direction. We want to, get our son's remains. We want to set the record straight. And we want to hold accountable those that did this brutal murder. And it wasn't just the brutal murder, it was the retaliation, it was the brutal murder, it was the premeditation of it, it was the cover up. And and I think even more, and part of it were, uh, because we have insurance friends. Um, but before I get into that, I wanted to say, you know, how this all developed, because the declaration of death was very, very important, and that led us to get even some more open records, some information, and putting all of the and there's so much of it. We haven't done it all yet, but all the evidence together. Um, and we really apologize if we leave out uh, your stories, your information that you have given us, because this is the amount of evidence is vast, and it really paints a picture. And that picture is that Richard was brutally murdered, for being a whistleblower, and they knew it. And they knew it. The officials, the security, um, the response team, the unit, they knew that Richard had been murdered. Okay, they knew that there was incidences before then, that there was a lot of tension, and we have a 15-6 that said there was a lot of tension. The whole thing with the COVID and all of that came later was a disaster. Was a psyop, absolutely a psyop against us, very expensive, and um, just if they can do that and they lie about the moon, then of course they're going to lie about Richard, right? They can absolutely lie about Richard, and they did, and they did. And so we know now that the evidence is so overwhelming that they already had done forensics before, very early on, and had declared Richard deceased very early on. They knew he was dead, and so the whole uh, findings and opinions of professionals is that the FBI would never release that they had found Richard without doing some forensics to identify him with DNA or dental. They have different ways, but with DNA and dental, and it's like, okay, yeah, they did. Um, so, and they weren't really anxious to make sure that they had DNA from Richard. You see what we cannot add to and this is why we check with friends and everything. Um, we cannot add to our findings the expressions and the vibes that you get when you're talking to, like, Marlon Soto, when you're talking to the general, when you're talking to David Park, and when you're talking to Yoshida, Captain Yoshida, when you're communicating with Jay Paulin or any of the soldiers, you cannot really put that in the findings, but they still are there, right? They're there, and I want to express to you that there was just this feeling, this aura of cover up going on, an aura that they weren't urgent in anything, right? And because they weren't urgent, you could tell that, either they didn't care, which, that would be terrible, but that they already had Richard's remains, they already had the answers. And so when we received that they already had the remains through the DES, through uh, DHS, through Department of State, through Nadal Baim, he's the clearest one, right? He's the clearest one, through um, the Board of Inquiry, the declaration of death, okay? They're not going to give you that kind of declaration of death unless they have his remains, unless they have, yeah, um, that DNA and everything. So if that, um, and this is where I'm just going to ask the questions, right? Ask the questions of Team Find Richard Halliday. Thank you, Marilyn, for coming on. Good evening. All of God's blessings to you and your family and friends. Justice for Richard Halliday. Thank you so much, especially on this Sunday night. It was just a fantastic day. And you kind of calm down on Sundays, and then you can really reflect. And if you spend it with family like we do, then we can really reflect, even after not even discussing anything, but um, just getting away from it makes you reflect. Does that make sense? I think it makes sense, because sometimes you need to take a break in order to see things clearly when you go back and look at the evidence. And one of the things that popped up, is if they had the DNA, if they had Richard's remains, which we know they did. They had Richard's remains, they had Richard's DNA, okay? Then that means they have a death certificate. That means a death certificate was issued. We don't have a death certificate of Richard, we have the declaration of death. Okay? To get the death certificate, we need to go to Mario Raskin Ortiz. We need to go to the very man that is illegal, that is unqualified. Okay, the El Paso chief medical examiner. He's unqualified. He is um, in that position on conflicts of interest. That, when you learn about the conflicts of interest with Bliss Avenue, that he is directly connected to Bliss Avenue, and to Veronica Escobar, to Joanne Bernal, who left. She left. She saw the writing on the wall. She saw the writing on the wall. Um, and that there's a lot of fraud surrounding Mario Raskin Ortiz. There's a lot of fraud, and he makes what, almost $450,000 a year from the taxpayers there in El Paso. And I think the taxpayers could absolutely take a little trimming of the taxes, right? They could use a little help right now. They could use a little, I mean, it's one thing to pay taxes, but to pay taxes to a fraudster, that's really, really hurts. That really hurts. So, so in order to get a death certificate, we would have to apply then with the El Paso chief medical examiner. But what if he already issued one? What if he already issued one years ago? This is, a real possibility, and why, and plausible, because, and those aren't my words. I'm repeating the words because um, they found Richard's remains. If they, how long does it take to, when you find remains, to issue a death certificate? And we do have these three autopsy reports. Um, if we have those, and if they say they have identified Richard, that means they've done DNA. That means an autopsy has been done. That means that they've issued a death certificate. Um, that's so, once you put all the evidence together, it leads from one point to the next, one point to the next. And so this is very plausible that they issued a death certificate. Okay, now why would they do that? Where would that go? And all of that. And our other evidence, because we have so much, we have so mountains of evidence, you know, connects the Bliss people, the criminal group from the original response team, um, the Walmart mass shooting case. And when you put who we believe are the suspects, the criminal group, they kind of identified themselves, right? They didn't kind of, they did identify themselves by harassing us, by threatening us, by impersonating us, and they identified themselves because they came into this capital murder case. And in social media, they formed one site after the next and they joined it. And that's how we found out that Jules Tuganon Chan, before we even knew who he was, before we knew were even thinking about Fit Femme El Paso, that he was in that group with Dallas Hart, with Leilani Hart, with Bob Moore, with Corinne Adeline West, with Amber Chase, with those that were harassing us with a very sexual tone to everything, and impersonating us, um, uh, you know, just really acting criminal. I mean, they were actually in criminal activities, and here he is in security and health and security, and he's engaging in open criminal activity by joining this group of prime suspects of the criminal group from the original response team. That is, we have a lot of evidence in this case. And why would Bob Moore ever do that? Why would he go and talk to Leilani Hart and Dallas Hart and Corinne Adeline West and everything to get information on Richard's death, but ignore us, and not even give us a voice when we contacted him no less than 15 times to really beg for him to hear our story and publish a retraction, publish a correct story on what our evidence shows what happened to Richard. And no, he's the one that used the unreliable source, Leilani Hart. He knows that Leilani Hart, because we sent it to him, is a confirmed convicted criminal. That not only did she lie to law enforcement, okay, that is very important in this. She doesn't hesitate to lie to law enforcement. Okay, she doesn't hesitate to confess and notarize a criminal complaint right when Richard was murdered, um, in order to try to divert guilt to her family. Her family, really, she sold out her family. And if they were participating in these years of child sexual assault and child pornography and weapons purchasing illegally and threatening her and the sexual assault of a 7-year-old in her master bedroom, why didn't she come forward then if she really cared? You see, it had nothing to do with her really caring that her family was engaged in these very, very violent and serious crimes. There was a different motive for her to give her confession on July 22nd, 2020. And she had that notarized, right? Because she has a credibility problem. She's not credible. And so in order to give her statement, her confession more credibility, she went and had it notarized. And we talked to the notary that notarized that. So, what that shows is that does she have a propensity to fraud, right? Does she have a propensity to do fraud? Would she have a propensity to tamper with files. Yes, a matter of fact, we have a witness that said she tampered with Richard's file, that she tampered with a lot of files in the CID, which always has concerned us, that, and even I think it was Amber Chase that said, or I don't know if it was her, that said that Leilani had, it wasn't just Richard's file. Okay, that doesn't make things better, right? She tampered with Richard's file. We know that. And she tampered with other people's file. Why? And does she have a propensity to do fraud? And so, you know, this question of insurance fraud in Richard's case, it has a lot of legs because she absolutely has a propensity to commit fraud, right? She's a prime suspect in this case because of fraud, because of tampering with Richard's file for giving sexual favors to her family member, Tavita Nusa, who was a Fort Bliss CID agent right there in that office. And she was bragging that she controlled the CID office. Okay. But that's not all of it. Um, so she had access to files there. But don't forget her husband was there at the VA with access to the most vulnerable soldiers on Fort Bliss, um, right there at the VA, the Disability Benefits Office. And so, does he have the propensity to do fraud? Um, is he involved in this kind of fraud? Um, could that be? That's the question. Could that be a possibility? Right? And so we have the answer yes for Leilani, yes for, um, the question out there for James Courtney Hart. Um, do we have witness testimony of possibility with Dallas committing fraud? And we do. We do. Using other people's computers, right? Logging in as other people and working on whatever on other people's computers. Um, so we have that. And of course, Tavita Nusa, does he have? Yeah, well, he's not faithful in his marriage. He's a fraud. He's not faithful as a CID agent. He's a fraud. He's not faithful as a soldier in the United States military. He's a fraud. He is not true to anybody, anything. He is self-serving. Um, so, that is a real possibility. What about Bill Hicks? What about their connection with Bill Hicks and Bob Moore? Do they have a propensity to, work behind the scenes, behind the curtain, illegally, doing illegal things? Yes, absolutely they do. And do they have connections with other people? Um, yes, they do. And do they have connections with, in Richard's case, with the chief medical examiner to get, do they have, Bill Hicks did insurance claims, right? He's an insurance lawyer. And then there's another insurance lawyer too. And then even Danae talked about working with insurance. So all these red flags, boom, boom, boom. They have the chief medical examiner, they have the VA worker, they have the lawyer, they have Leilani Hart, who we also have corroborating evidence that she already has tried to commit insurance fraud. And so, was there if an attempt to tamper with Richard's files in order to cash in on insurance of Richard? Did they think he was a nobody, that nobody cared about him? Did they, try to cash in on his murder? Would that be a possibility? Would they have the network to do it? Do they have the lawyers to do it? Do they have the medical examiner to do it? Do they have the access to the files to do it? Do they have the training to do it? And I would say every one of those questions, the answer is yes. And so I think that this, and of course you'd have to ask more questions, and you'd have to do more of an investigation. What I'm saying is there a propensity for fraud, for insurance fraud? Could it happen? Is that something that we need to take time out and look into it? And would that help get Richard's remains? And I believe that anytime you're uncovering this kind of fraud, it's going to help El Paso, right? It's going to help El Paso, which will help officials uh, be weeded out if they're compromised, and that way that would help us get Richard's remains, because we need ethical um, individuals in these positions to get us the answers that we need, because we've been stonewalled. We've been, whatever you call all the different tactics that they have. So I think that uh, insurance fraud is a real possibility in this. And of course, the tampering with files and that. And just think about that for a little bit. That they would have to have the death certificate early on, like August 22 2020, August 2020, right? um so so that is something that we're looking at. And of course we have gotten attention because of the FitFam El Paso LLC. That is a very profitable business, y'all. They're selling through Cash App because they have to do everything in cash because of the situation they're in right now. And we're going to address that. We're letting it play out a little bit. Uh, that's always important to do instead of rush to action. So we've taken a little time to let this sink in. And so it has gotten some traction that, Find Richard Halliday, Team Find Richard Halliday acquired FitFam El Paso LLC with the name brands, meaning the real FitFam El Paso and El Paso FitFam El Paso. So with those name brands, and having the LLC, will absolutely keep you updated on that. And yeah, were they committing fraud? It seems like it to us that they are committing fraud. And so that's a whole nother proof that was does this criminal network that are working together, absolutely, um, do they have the ability to pull something like this off, a insurance scam, or profiting off of insurance by tampering with files and everything, with the beneficiaries of a large um, uh, life insurance policy. And the whole life insurance policy, um, who who coaches the soldiers on which life insurance policy to get? Could that be, in Richard's case, Dallas Hart? It's all of these questions are huge. And we do think it has legs. We do feel that that needs to be looked into for the sake of um, El Pasoans, because that cannot be allowed to stay in place. A insurance fraud network. That cannot be allowed to stay, because then the security of everybody is at risk. If there's going to be criminal activity within the very industry that's supposed to give us safety, um, yeah, that's not, and insurance has a long history. If you've ever looked into it, how it's totally biblical. It's totally biblical, but not for the way they use it today, right? So they've twisted it a bit, right? So we just want to thank you so much for giving us all of the information, for giving us your expertise, Team Find Richard Halliday. And this is huge breaking news. So please share it, and we will be back on tomorrow. Thank you, Danielle, for coming on. And thank you. And we'll be back tomorrow, God willing. Bye bye.